Okay, so now we're going to talk about snapping. If you don't have a screen that looks like this, remember that control up arrow with the cursor in the view that you're wanting to make full screen is full screen, right? So that's what I have. I have it set to full screen. Okay, so the first kind of snapping we're going to talk about here is viewport snapping. And that is turned on with this little icon here. It's off by default, grayed by default. When you turn it on, it's red. And next to it there are some options, and in this case we want increment. So that would be basically to the grid for movement, and then there are default increments for scale and rotation. Okay, so let's talk about that. So to well, here, just if you move the box, you can see it's moving at the distance of each one of those grid squares, right? So just a quick demonstration of how that works, right? You can see, and then it also works up and down and so on. And rotation, if you drag the rotation manipulator, right, you can see it will rotate in increments. If you look up here, you can see it's going in 5-degree increments, right? 5, 60, 65, like that, right? So Alt R to get rid of the rotation there. And the same is true, look at the scale increments here. If I have scale, it's going to scale it by 0.1 each time, right? And so when you're snapping, those are pretty good. There may be a way to adjust those defaults, but you know, for snapping purposes, for me it always seems to be fine, especially the rotation. 5 degrees is good enough for me. A lot of times I just want to quickly, you know, get it to interactively go to 45 or some other, you know, very even degree. If you want to get more precise rotation, just do it numerically. Okay, so anyway, that's snapping for scale, rotation, and movement. So now how to further adjust this is you adjust this grid here in the center, right? So let's show how you do that. So pull down here to where it says display, and this could be closed, you know, collapsed by default. You want to expand it, and then you'll see options for the grid floor. Alright, so you can turn it on and off. We don't need to do that now. And then the number of lines, that's just visual. That's just how many lines are visible. Alright, by default it's 16. Right? And the important one is this scale. That is set to a Blender unit. So if we go to top view and we're in orthographic view, you can see these thicker black lines are one Blender unit. Right, so if I zoom out far enough, yeah, you see we're just looking at the thick line. Same as in the perspective view, I can only move it, you know, one unit at a time. And if you remember, these cubes by default come in at 1 unit by 1 unit, basically making a 2-unit cube. You know, it's one this way and one that way, making 2. So it's a 2-unit cube, right? So you can see how that lines up with the grid. So if I change the grid to 0.5, then it will be twice as many lines, right? And so if we zoom out to where we can just see those black lines, now I can move it in a smaller increment. Okay, and so now this next input is subdivisions, and of course that's kind of self-explanatory. It would be 10 subdivisions per every scale unit. So in this case we have 0.5 and then 10 of those inside. So if I zoom in far enough, I can see those 10 squares in there, and now I can move along those 10 increments, okay, or those 10 increments. So if you do a little bit of math, you can know what that each one of those increments would be as a percentage of that 5. Okay, so that's pretty important. When I'm trying to do stuff that's precise, I'll set this to 1 and then use the scale. Is how I will approach that. Okay, so that way I know I'm never doing it any more than what the scale is if I want to get real precise. In the 3D view, it's always going to be at the scale and not the subdivision level. That only works in an orthographic view like this. Okay, so that's just a small tip there. So there's more snapping options to get into, but for now this covers the basic viewport snapping.